On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Ashland and Bayfield Counties, I want to welcome you to our annual fall membership meeting. Last year, when we were hosting this meeting, also via Zoom, we had been hoping that this year we would be meeting in person. But as we all know, the pandemic continues, and we feel it's really important that we be safe. So we chose to utilize this virtual platform, and I am truly hopeful that next year we will be doing this in person. So tonight we have a wonderful program lined up for you. We are honored to have our own board member, Dee Sweet, facilitating a critical discussion with Paul DeMain on climate change. Dee will be introducing Paul shortly. And just so you know, the layout of our evening, after Dee facilitates that discussion with Paul, we're going to have a question and answer period. Following that, we will hear from our league committee chairs on the important work their committees are doing, and also sharing opportunities where you can join in. I want to thank Gail Seabrood, our membership chair, and Dee Sweet for organizing this meeting. And I also want to thank all of you for attending. I think there's some very important messages that we're going to be hearing about tonight. And it's something that is really near and dear to our livelihood, our bodies, our earth, our water. So thank you for attending and being present in this meaningful discussion. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dee Sweet. Dee is a First Nations organizer for Wisconsin Conservation Voices and manager for Wisconsin Native Vote. Wisconsin Native Vote is a nonpartisan nonprofit entity and works to strengthen civic engagement, voter education, and voter access in tribal communities, both urban and rural. She is also a writer and was appointed by Governor Jim Doyle to serve as Wisconsin's second poet laureate from 2004 to 2008. She currently serves as a board member of the League of Women Voters of Ashland and Bayfield Counties and also for the Bayfield School District. Dee is an Anishinaabeg enrolled at White Earth. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dee.
Bonjour, everyone. Greetings to Sue and to my friend Paul. I've been waiting for this opportunity because I've wanted to catch up with Paul DeMain and hear of his what his life is like now. I've been following him in the news, and I know that he is doing the work that he's been doing since I got to meet him in the mid-'80s. So when we were putting together the sort of brainstorming the program for our fall membership meeting, I suggested a number of people, but I lobbied for Paul because I felt as though he is on the front lines right now, working with many of our Native environmentalists, working with many organizations, both regionally and nationally. And the question was put out there to the membership, to the board of directors, well, what would we have Paul talk about? And ideas came in, and we kept thinking about all the different issues that Paul could talk about. So really, the better question would be, what can Paul not talk about? So that would have been any number of issues that could inform us, to enlighten us, to bring us up to speed. Paul DeMain is our honored guest tonight. Paul is the founder of News from Indian Country and CEO for Indian Country Communications. He served as the past president of Native American Journalists Association and was an advisor on Indian affairs policy to Governor Tony Earl. DeMain is currently the chair of the Under the Earth Board of Directors and is an active opponent of Enbridge Line 3 oil pipeline placement. He is a citizen of the great Oneida Nation, and as I am a citizen of the White Earth Band of Lake Superior, Ojibwe. So somewhere along the line, we probably are related, and I would be pleased with that. I want to just review with you that Paul is going to be talking primarily about his perspective on the climate crisis currently, He's going to possibly bring us a field report from Line 3 encampment. And I'd like to also hear him talk about the endangered ecosystems of the wild rice. So hopefully he'll be able to touch on those subjects in the next 30 minutes or so. And then after that, we'll open it up for your questions and comments. So with that, with all due respect and honor, I welcome Paul DeMain.
Miigwech, thank you, Dee. I appreciate that. I'd like to open up with a traditional greeting that Indigenous people do, and that is Bujuin Dinaway Maganaduk. Hello, all my relatives, and that includes human beings as well. Skabewis Indigenikas. My Ojibwe name is Skabewis. It means the messenger. Badigmadeo Minoa Makwa Dudame. I'm a member of the Medewan Lodge and of the Bear Clan, and the Bear Clan will designate my family relationships within the Oneida Nation and social relationships for any tribe that has a Bear Clan with it. There's a lot of diplomatic protocol that goes with belonging to a family clan, which on the European side is similar to the fact that I'm part of the Morrison clan, Scottish clan, Morrison, from Scotland historically too, all the way back to the island of Lewis in the year 1200. But we won't get into my family tree, which includes over 5,000 people at the moment. We'll talk about the impact of world events on the relatives that exist now and those that are coming for the future. So with that introduction, and of course, I'm known as Paul DeMain, and I'm involved in a lot of things. I'm currently the chairman of the board of directors for Honor the Earth, the Minnesota environmental organization that hired Winona LaDuke as its executive director and is funded a great deal by the Indigo Girls and concerts and projects on a regranting program that we put out through the United States and Canada as a faraway thought about how we need to respond to global warming and climate change. And I don't think I have to say much about that really to people. I don't think I have to explain it. I don't think I have to talk about the Australian fires or the floods in China or New York or the California drought or the fires in Seattle, Washington and California or the two 1,000-year floods that northern Wisconsin had here in the last 5 years. I think those types of situation are apparent because we're experiencing them. We have people who can tell you exactly how much change there is. Before the late Joe Rose passed away, he talked about the disappearance of the snowshoe rabbit in northern Wisconsin because they could no longer hide during their entire season because of the global warming. In northern Wisconsin, the sugarbush season arriving late February rather than mid-April, when it was historically called the maple syrup making moon during that period. And so we're 30 to 40 some days at least ahead of the scheduling of the moon that mark those seasons. And so there's people who take some time working with nature and the environment who have seen all kinds of changes. It seems that deniers are the same kind of people who find a beautiful view on a lake and buy a 1 acre lot, build a 3-story house so nobody else can see that beautiful view kind of perspective, or someone who goes to northern Wisconsin and buys 80 acres, not because it's a beautiful spot, but because they see board feet. And rather than using that to sustain the community through the medicines and the sugar and the products that come out of there over a long term, they look to commoditize that resource and cut it down and get it to the mill and then maybe sell the land off right away so you can turn it around and go exploit some other resource for their personal benefit and to the negative impact of all the communities that live around them, including human beings. And so when I talk today as the messenger, Skabewis in Ojibwe country, I note that I speak for those who do not have a voice. So I do conduct funerals And I do talk to the peepers, and I talk to many things out there in nature when I'm offering my blessing and tobacco on a regular basis, because when you talk to nature, when you talk to birds, I don't go out there and say, "Hi, bird, how are you?" And the bird says, "Oh, I'm doing real fine, Paul." But if you listen to nature and you watch what they're doing, you begin to understand and see patterns. You can understand what distress is. You can understand what friendliness is and those kinds of things. And so there's a lot to, quote unquote, how the Indians used to talk with the animals kind of a thing, which isn't in that essence. They understood each other. And I think the most compatible animal we had was the wolf. And we understood the dynamics of the wolf hierarchy and worked with it. I mean, I know farmers who have wolf packs in their backyard and they haven't had any problems at all. But that's about talking about how to listen to nature to try to survive what I think is the coming calamity. And I'm not so sure that we're going to make it through this period without a calamity, because in our stories, if you read a book called the Mishomis book, you'll read about the Great Flood. If you go inside the Medicine Lodge, they talk about the last 3 times the earth was cleansed because human beings messed it up. And I remember speaking to a church group one time, and I started talking about the Great Flood, and someone had to stop me in dead tracks and says, "Oh, you have a story about the Great Flood too?" And I says, "Yeah, I just said we had a flood. It didn't just flood your half of the earth. It flooded the earth and it cleansed the entire earth. And if Adam and Eve survived from that, or if the little muskrat went down and got that paw of dirt and brought it back up to recreate the earth in the image of God and creation, we both had floods, which tells me that it's probably likely that something like that happened at one time in the past, and we may be facing the same situation." So I talk to my grandchildren about surviving. I talk about how people preparing in the big cities, with underground bunkers and food for 3 months, to hide down in that big bunker and everything that won't have electricity and won't have all kinds of other things. The question is do you want to even survive what I think might happen? But we need to make sure that we're prepared in order to do a number of things. Number one, survive, and we have sources of food. And so the best way to do that is to begin growing food for ourselves and begin understanding the ecosystem around us, even though it's changing dramatically because of global warming and climate change. And when we start talking about that subject, we simply get into what are the causes. And I don't think anyone wants to argue with the scientists that say that it has to do with our fossil fuel use and dirty oil, and the dirtiest of that being the tar sands. I can say publicly that I'm not trying to shut down all the oil industry today so that everyone is stranded on foot and doesn't know how to get to work or get to the bank to withdraw their money or whatever it is they're concerned about at that point. That's not my point. I think my point in creating opposition to the Enbridge grid, which is not only line 3, it's line 5, it's line 61 expansion, it's the entire footprint. Asking the question is how long are we going to allow a foreign corporation to bring the dirtiest product in the fossil fuel industry through the United States as a shortcut so they can make big bucks? And that really is the question. I'd like to see that shut down, because nobody is buying their product in the United States other than a little bit of a dumped natural gas on the UP that used to be delivered by local contractors and now delivered by a foreign corporation, or the products that go through Wisconsin on their way to Patoka, Illinois, on their way to Cushing, Oklahoma, on their way to the refineries of Texas, where they're refined into other ingredients that are then shipped overseas and sold to countries, poor countries, sometimes with money from the Intermonetary Fund, because tar sands cost $90 a barrel to extract and produce and send down here. And we can frack oil in Montana at $70 a barrel, and we can take it out of Oklahoma and Texas at $55 a barrel. So if you had a gas station down the street that was selling gas at $5 a gallon, why would everyone run over there and say, wow, Enbridge has a deal on gas, it's only $5 a gallon, when your next door neighbor is selling it at $2.50 a gallon? Let's run down to Enbridge and buy all that really, really good high-priced oil. For some reason, we need it. Well, we don't need it. We don't use it in the United States, and it's the dirtiest environmental impacting fossil fuels that exist. And what we like to see Waltz and Evers and Biden and other people say is, let's start with that dirty tar sands and work with it. Once we get that shut down, we can work on transferring the country to a green energy economy of some kind, but we really have to jumpstart it because a lot of us believe that there's very little time. The destructive nature of all these environmental impacts is showing itself in death tolls. Even the pandemic seems to me to be a sign that the globalization of transportation and food chains, which, I mean, people ran out of meat in Walmart. If you're reliant on Walmart for your meat and everything else, they ran out of toilet paper as well because of national distribution chains in which we no longer make toilet paper in Wisconsin. So we have to wait for it being shipped from somewhere in Lafayette, Arkansas, where the Waltons have their major headquarters. I thought that was kind of interesting that the people didn't know what to do, other than stock up. I went back to the local meat market. The people at Oneida Farms in Mellon, Wisconsin, have been selling their local meat products for 128 years, and there was no shortage there. And so the pandemic, I think, showed us that we have shortcomings that we can resolve in part by coming back to our local economies and local gardening, local sustainability, reducing our fossil fuel imprint, getting rid of the worst products that are impacting our environment is a good place to start. So, and we as Indigenous people bring a unique perspective to the table. We bring a perspective that's, 25, 40,000 years old. I don't know. I mean, the Bering Strait, when I started out in school, it seemed to me, 50 years ago that the Bering Strait theory was something like 28,000 years ago, and then it went to 36, and then there was Clovis at 48, and scientists don't know exactly everything that they're talking about at times. But our presence has been here a long time. And we know that 150 years ago or so, our grandfathers were forced to sit at the table at gunpoint, and some of them plied with liquor and told they had to give up their lands. And one of the last things that they demanded from the beginning of the treaties to the end was the right to hunt and fish and access food resources and the protection of their burial grounds. If you look at Wisconsin, at Flambeau, at Lac-Courte, at Mole Lake, those are all protected sites that not only have burial grounds, but they have rice beds that were defended by the Ojibwe people, which caused those burial grounds to be there at those particular sites. So they fought hard to protect their food resources. When they signed their treaties 150 years ago, what was on their mind was, how are our children and grandchildren going to feed themselves in this situation? We can cede the land. We've got to give it up. Otherwise, we end up in Oklahoma or somewhere else where they're sending all the Indigenous people in this country as they there goes the neighborhood syndrome kind of a thing. We wish we would have had strong immigration laws a long time ago, because maybe we could have slowed things down a little bit, but that's not the way history works. So our people were concerned about those, and the Ojibwe people signed 44 different treaties from the beginning in Indiana and Michigan, sweeping across over into North Dakota and as far away as the Little Shell Band in Montana. 44 treaties that all in a lot of ways underscored what their thoughts were. And that is they wanted access to the resources, the fish, the hunting capabilities, and resource gathering for their medicines, and the use of those products in the woods for manufacturing homes and products that they use to sustain themselves. And those are called usufructuary rights. And they tend to be nowadays something that a lot of non-Indians rely upon. We always hear, we've been waiting for the Indians to show up because they got treaty rights that are going to protect the resources, because we can't find the willpower to find the reasons to defend ourselves from all this capitalism or corporate greed or whatever it's going on that drives the economy to do things that have huge negative impacts on the earth and eventually the people that are residing on it in terms of cancers and poisonings and whatever else happens with adverse health effects. When you have, you can't eat the deer because of chronic wasting disease and all that. Lots of issues and a lot of capability to bring this to the table. And I want to run through real quickly some of the Line 3 stuff, but I want to say that right now there's a lawsuit against the Army Corps of Engineers by Minnesota tribal governments. There was lawsuits against the Public Utilities Commission and several other agencies that gave the permit to Enbridge to put line through northern Minnesota. There's a lawsuit against the Minnesota DNR, which is a pretty unique one. If I can find it real quickly here, it's entitled Manoomin versus the Minnesota DNR. And it says that Manoomin, or wild rice in northern Minnesota, and the ecosystems of the Shell River and Rice Lake and Sandy Lake have a right to live. They have a right to exist because the Creator put them here on this earth, and human beings don't have a right to stamp out their livelihood any more than they have a right to stamp out the livelihood of any other human being. And when I talked earlier and says, and Dinoe Maganaduk, and said, hello, all my relatives, it's human beings that are included at the very tail end of that introduction because they were the last to be put here and are the most dependent on everything else around us. So those usufructuary rights, we hope are going to protect in the future. Because out of this, we hope to teach the Minnesota DNR a lesson about all its agency powers, in which what it did, and it seems like a conspiracy, a well-funded conspiracy with one of the biggest oil funding loops I've ever seen. If you want candy in northern Minnesota, Wisconsin, or Michigan, ask Enbridge. Food pantry money, roads, fairs. There's a new controversy over funding of the Apple Fest and why they took the money. There was a fiasco in Hayward, Wisconsin over the Birkenbeiner. This foreign corporation is trying to influence tribal elections at Fond du Lac and Bad River to be able to get their way. There's advertising in every single major newspaper in Wisconsin during the Packers, during radio shows. If you want money, go to Enbridge. They're giving it away. They've hired every Indian that's for sale and in the Great Lakes. And it's great. You know, it went from 200 Indians earlier this year to 350 to 500. Now it's something like 670. I says, that's great. I just wish they would have been doing it for the last 60 years rather than the last 6 months as a social obligation to the communities that they say they serve. But I want to point out something what happened to us in this whole process, and this is how you can totally subvert the permitting process by having a lot of money and being a foreign corporation and talking about jobs, jobs, jobs. I keep saying if they want jobs, they could go rebuild water pipelines in Flint, Michigan, and have jobs for a long time. But now that Enbridge claims that the line is 99.9% done and in, I hope the labor unions get off our back about the jobs, jobs, jobs because of water protectors. The contracts that were supposed to be 6 months went to 9 months, went to 10 months, and they got their contracts, they got their money, and the political problems on the Democratic side of the social network between the environmentalists and unions needs to be resolved in some way other than having a foreign corporation buy that particular faction out in the political process. But Minnesota ignored a lot of things, and this is what the tribes in Minnesota are pissed off about. Pollution Control Agency found Chippewa rights, water rights, and Public Law 280 were federal issues. Therefore, they excluded Red Lakes and White Earth's legal arguments from a contested case proceeding. Here's a memo from the Minnesota DNR to the Public Utilities Commission regarding the band's claim that it has usufructuary rights. Those are treaty rights to access resources that have always been yours and that have never been taken away. Okay, usufructuary rights are like saying, you know, we own this land. Some U.S. government didn't give it to us. No federal judge gave it to us. We've owned that in perpetuity for an awful long time, and it's still ours, and we can access it. The bands claim that its usufructuary rights in the 1855 ceded territory in the context of addressing the band's request to intervene in these proceedings. A PUC decision to permit the band to intervene in these proceedings premised on claimed usufructuary rights could have legal implications, reaching well beyond these proceedings. Yeah, the state might actually recognize them for a change, that the Ojibwe still have hunting and fishing rights and gathering rights in Minnesota, and the right to use public parks without paying fees, which Minnesota just waived last week, interesting, as some kind of a bone to the Indian community. Indians in Minnesota no longer have to pay to get into the parks. The DNR therefore requests that if the PUC permits the band to intervene it do so using its discretionary authority without addressing the band's claim that it has usufructuary treaty rights in the 1855 treaty territory. Now over here, it said these issues of treaty rights, water rights, and Public 280, which is jurisdictional issues, was a federal problem. And so, yeah, the tribes all got prepared for the federal process. Donald Trump gets elected. Week 2, Public Utilities Commission, Minnesota DNR, Enbridge go to the Army Corps of Engineer, where all those analysis of treaty rights, water rights, hydrology, geological, archaeological things would have taken place. And what does the Army Corps of Engineers do? Trump administrations, we want the jobs. Let's waive the environmental impact statement that was due for these tribes, because whatever Minnesota is good enough. The trouble is it wasn't done right in Minnesota because of these particular issues that are now going to go to court. How do you say, look, at your forum is at the federal level under the treaties, and then when they get there, they take the forum away from them? So if you see lawsuits and angry Indians in Minnesota, it's not only because they've been tread upon, it's because they've been ignored, deceived, manipulated, and resources are being stolen from them today. The net result, while rice is now going between $18 and $25 a pound, rather than 10 to 15. Last year, I bought 1,000 pounds for $10 a pound, 100 pounds for $1,000 or $10 a pound. This year, I bought 100 pounds for $18 a pound, because in the middle of a drought, Enbridge, which realized last December that it had a water issue, they asked for 520 million gallons of water to be used in their dewatering process. And before the permit was issued by Minnesota DNR, said they understood they had made some engineering errors. We found out about it on May 27th when the Minnesota DNR notified the tribes that there would be a change in the water hydrology permit from 520 million gallons to 485 billion. In the middle of a drought, tribes were notified on May 27th. June 7th is when the Minnesota DNR issued that permit change without getting any consultation back from the tribes. They basically says, here's what Enbridge said they needed. They made an engineering mistake back here. Well, they made a lot of engineering mistakes on hydrology, 32 frac outs, 2 breaches of artesian wells. So when we talk about the destruction to the earth for the fossil fuel industry, it's because we've pinpointed not only a flaw in the engineering studies that have been going on, whether it's, the big bust down in Minnesota that took place about 7 years ago on the river, or the Grand Rapids bust in northern Minnesota, or whether it's the Mackinac Straits issue that's coming to a head legally. The people that I'm involved in are saying we need to start at the top with the most dangerous tar sands, with the most dangerous company that has one of the worst records in terms of spills. Today we're reading about the California spill out in Ventura, Santa Barbara, California. When I was out there in the 1960s, the first oil spill of an offshore platform took place in Santa Barbara, Ventura area, because I was walking on the beach and picking up oil droplets, and the oil industry says it isn't going to happen again. The nuclear power plants in Fukushima are so good, they're not going to leak. The levees in New Orleans are so engineered so well that even the Titanic is not going to sink. We know that engineering has flawed, and we know that these infrastructures are vast. We know that on a daily basis, Enbridge loses up to 90,000 gallons of product, and no whistles go off because that's called shrinkage. In the maple syrup industry, it's called shrinkage anyway, but yeah, their product shrinks as it goes along because droplets and things vaporize. We're looking at the worst spills and trying to say that we don't want it. Why isn't this pipeline going from Canada over to Sarnia, Ontario, Canada for the refineries and everything, going through Canadian territory? Because Canadians don't want it going through the Hudson Bay watershed. What's that tell about the United States? It's easier to go through here and buy politicians off and run it through the United States than take it to their own country if it's that valuable. It should be there if that's what they think is the right thing to do. We want it out of the United States. All of this has to do with, treaty rights and relationships. Certainly in northern Minnesota, things are very, very pressed. We've been through really several battles. We met on Madeline Island the last few days, and we celebrated our victories, because throughout the world, in other parts of the country, those countries who have transformed from fossil fuels to electricity and wind energy and solar energy, some of these countries like Israel and Norway and other countries that are in some cases getting close to being 100% fossil fuel free. Indigenous people and the water protectors of northern Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan are heroes, because they're trying to save the earth from a greedy foreign corporation that has corrupted the political and social system in the United States. And they bought their water policies, they bought the decision-making permitting process. There isn't anywhere you can go that you can't find 10 to 15 or 20 lawyers that are being paid muco bucks against Paul DeMain and Winona LaDuke, and other people who don't have the kind of influence and money that they have to be able to influence and buy policy. You know, good cases, and I think I'm getting close to the end of my time. Wave my hand if I'm close to my time. For the last 25 years in northern Wisconsin, I've watched non-Indians claim they got drunk at night, shooting a gun at a red squirrel while indigenous fishermen were on the lakes spearfishing. Okay, we've had incidents every single year with white guys shooting guns around the lakes. Okay, 2 years ago, some young man in Douglas County around Superior threw a rock at an Enbridge worker in a cab and busted the window. He got arrested for assault, damage to the equipment. He went to jail, he paid a fine. The Enbridge guy wasn't hurt by the rock. We had legislators in the state of Wisconsin introduce a law because of that incident that now said we have to protect those pipeline workers because of that rock in Wisconsin. It now is a felony to go on an infrastructure easement owned by Enbridge and face felony charges. They got that law changed from a misdemeanor to a felony. When I told Janet Bewley that I thought that was ridiculous, she's our senator from the area, I says, what you ought to do is introduce a law that says you can't shoot late at night when you're drunk, a gun on a lake being speared by Indian fishermen. She says there is no willpower. That's how privileged some people in our community are, that they can get their own legislation passed. That's how privileged a foreign corporation with billions is privileged to get their own little law to fix their problem when there's no will to protect the citizens that have been here for thousands of years. So the global warming war, the issue of climate change, you don't have to talk to indigenous people about how the environment's changing. We see it all over the place, and there has been mostly nothing but degradation other than some of the waters and air quality because of the Environmental Protection Agency that goes up and down depending on administration. But essentially, if I talked with my my grandfather and mentor, Pipe Mustache, he would have told me I've seen nothing but degradation of the earth from the time of the arrival of the new people until now. And Archie Mose said he didn't have a whole lot of hope, other than the fact that he had a dream in which the world was all beautiful and the lakes were blue again and everyone was happy. And he says, it seems to me, I've seen the future, and it's another cleansing, because human beings are some of the filthiest people, you know, to make their own bed. You know, kind of saying, you know, certain animals don't foul their own bed, but human beings are willing to foul their bed. They're willing to foul their resources. They're willing to contaminate their water for the sake of a few bucks. So I guess I'd like to leave it at that particular point, even though I have 14 different documents that I haven't even looked at yet, and open it up for questions, I guess.
Chief Paul, there are so many things that I'd like to ask you, and I know that you have, you know, so much to share with us, and I really appreciate your taking the time away from your activities and your work to be with the League of Women Voters at our annual meeting. I just wanted to comment on your referencing the pandemic as being part and parcel of the situation that we're facing right now, and how it's a test run for us to once again realize how we are interdependent in a smaller space, in a smaller community, a more sustainable community. But I also know that, as you know, my son is a firefighter, and he
Yes.
is in Montana right now fighting wildfires. And he said that the fires out west have become so hot and so out of control that they're creating their own weather. And so when we think that we're not connected, we're not in relative to every other force in this planet, on this earth, in this region, we're mistaken. In fact, the ash and particulate matter and the air pollutants from Canada were affecting people in Bayfield. Air quality warnings.
Oh, in New York City, they had air quality reports, and there was so many reports of fires that local communities had, fire departments had to say, look, you're smelling fire. It's from Canada and from the western part of the United States. There's no fire here, and that was a week. That was like 21 days worth of smoke in the air in some places. So yeah, Bayfield had it too.
Right. And so, to think that we are not islands, we are not separate and we are affected by climate change throughout the region, throughout the nation, throughout the planet. We have to face our responsibilities and our obligations as relatives. I just wanted to sort of insert that personal comment of mine, my concerns for my family and for my relatives. But I want to open it up too. There might be people in the audience. If you could raise your hand, and Sue will unmute you so that you can pose a question to our speaker. Anyone?
Nobody has any questions. I do note that over 1,000 citations to people have been issued in northern Minnesota from arrest, and a lot of those people were church organizations. Sheila has a hand up there.
Yep, we've got Sheila up. Sheila, if you can unmute. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. My understanding of the felony trespass law, which I was really upset about, was that this was an ALEC bill that was put in basically to pit the unions against the environmentalists. Can you make a comment about that?
You're correct. You're right.
Okay.
You don't think these guys know how to divide communities? Go to Hayward, Wisconsin, and ask about the Berkebine Foundation. Go over to Bayfield and ask about the Apple Fest. Go at Bad River, ask about tribal politics. Go to Fond du Lac, ask about tribal politics. Go to Le Coudray, ask about tribal politics. This company understands divide and conquer. They sent me a plane ticket to fly to Kalamazoo, and I had a personal young blonde guide assigned to me if I had gone. You don't think that's profiling? Like Putin had a nice, beautiful transcriber sitting next to her when Donald Trump was supposed to be conversing with him and not looking at her. Putin was great at it. And so is Enbridge. Enbridge profiles people. They have compensated law enforcement in northern Minnesota several $1 million. So when they went out there on a call at time and a half, late at night, extra weekends, extra vacation pay, the law enforcement officers were being paid by a foreign corporation to enforce, whatever laws it might be. What was more ironic was when this breach took place. Okay, the first breach of an artesian aquifer took place in January. Okay, that wasn't even supposed to happen because they didn't ask for an engineering change. They changed their whole engineering plan. They went down, thought they knew what they were doing. They busted an artesian, which is the worst thing you can do when you're building a pipeline or doing construction down into the ground, because the artesian aquifer is still leaking to this day to the tune of 240,000 gallons a day or something like that. They've lost, I think, a couple million gallons, and it's still breached at this particular point. They changed the plans. They didn't ask for permission to do that. According to federal law, Minnesota law, they were supposed to do that. After the aquifer was breached, they didn't notify it. The DNR monitor noted that Enbridge was saying they were having dewatering problems. It didn't say they breached an artesian well. That's still today breached and flowing out. And the person who was supposed to read the local reports that would have said, at least they would have said, Enbridge is having dewatering problems. That section of the pipeline isn't getting done because the reports are coming in. Enbridge is having dewatering. There's water flowing over a road. They're doing this. All kinds of the things. Nothing about an artesian aquifer breach. The guy that was supposed to read those reports didn't read them for 5.5 months. Okay, we just learned a little over a month ago about this aquifer breach that occurred in January that might have led to a stop work order, why people examined engineering and why it was breached, and they would have said, shit, you changed all the plans. You can't do that. That's illegal. What else have you changed on the 340-mile line without asking? So they were criminally charged. They were fined $3.6 million, which is a half a penny for every gallon that's leaked out of there so far, less. And every day that it is, it's less and less and less. And they're still working on that. There were criminal charges. There will be criminal charges. There's a criminal investigation in this that's been launched. So we know that there's deception that's gone on. Jefferson County, Wisconsin, they didn't report that spill for a year or so, and they reported it at a 1.5 gallon spill. It's now at 1,600, 1,700, 1,800 gallons. Kalamazoo was a disaster for the company, and they did a lot of engineering changes since then to remediate situations. But people are scared as heck that in the Mackinac Straits, that something's going to happen there. That's a 60-year-old pipeline under the Mackinac Straits that's still there. And if they're saying their pipeline is deteriorating, they have to change line 3 so badly because it's just falling apart. What the heck's happening under the Mackinac Straits? And they've asked for a tunnel down there, and the people over there are saying, no, enough is enough. We don't benefit from this pipeline. These products go to Sarnia, Ontario, Canada, and keep their gasoline prices down and nice over there. We take all the risk.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, Paul. I'm gonna ask Louise Pettering. Louise has her hand raised. Louise, can you unmute?
Thank you, Sue.
Mhm.
I am really puzzled by the prices that you have quoted, that you're saying that the $90 per barrel cost of producing oil from tar sands and
Yes.
$50 from producing oil from Oklahoma and Texas. I forget who produces it for $70.
Fracked oil.
I'm sorry.
Fracking in Montana and the Dakotas.
Okay.
Fracking.
Okay, well, how does the market tolerate this kind of stuff? What's going on there? Why are people willing to pay? Are they paying for the $90?
No,
I mean,
not in the United States. If you listen to the last couple of administrations, they bragged about how we take care of ourselves with our oil products. We don't need to import stuff. I don't know where all it fits in it, but supposedly we're supposed to be domestically and energy independent. We don't
Right.
need any tar sands. We don't use them. I mean, you can, and those numbers fluctuate all the time. I mean, the value of oil went way down during the pandemic because nobody was using any of it. And a barrel of oil out of Oklahoma pooled oil was going at $35 to $36 a barrel. Fracking almost went out of business. Out of 600 wells, there was something like 118 left by the end of the pandemic. Everyone else had gone out of business. And we don't even know if Enbridge has any forward capacity needs other than their imagination. In other words, if you look at who's divested, including the Rockefellers, from the tar sands industry, there isn't anyone funding any more refineries of that stuff. There isn't anyone funding the mining of that anymore. They've all pulled out. And so in a way, Enbridge is sitting out there saying, well, things are going to change and we're going to have all these future contracts, which aren't taking place. And they play a pretty dangerous game. They're one of the highest payer of guaranteed dividends in the oil industry. Why do you guarantee the payments of your dividends? It's to make sure that your investors don't run. This will be, if it goes in, the last tar sands pipeline that is built maybe in the whole world, because everyone kind of gets it, other than the people who are acting like Enron in a lot of ways with their future, just saying, let's just move straight ahead and let's ignore all that stuff. And who cares about Indians when we can buy the law enforcement agencies? And I know my point before is that here you have a monitor that didn't look at the reports for 5 months. Here you had a DNR monitor that was saying, well, it's not, I don't think it's an aquifer breach, it's dewatering problems, right? But if you went to the Mississippi on January 18th, when I went there, and there was 35 water protectors there in the street blocking Enbridge trucks, the 14 DNR agents that were sent up by the governor to help enforce and protect and arrest and beat and brutalize people who were trying to protect the water. There was 14 officers that day standing around. Can you imagine how they felt, the conundrum they were in, that they were arresting people trying to save the water and the destruction of the forest? People don't move to northern Minnesota so they can have a great big operation move through their neighbor and raise hell. There's permits out there that are lucky that no one got hurt on that side, literally. If there was people that live out there that were very disturbed by the activity but that was going on up there. But when you got money, you got it to invest it in all kinds of things. You can buy people off. My next neighbor came to me and says, this guy from Enbridge said he'd buy your property. No questions asked, for whatever you wanted. Why the hell would they do that? They bought 80 acres next to the Honor Earth, Callaway, Minnesota offices. Now, why would they do that? Why would they send a airplane ticket to Paul DeMain to come to Kalamazoo and send it to the Lakota tribal government? The secretary calls me up and says, there's a plane ticket over. There's a bunch of elders going, and Enbridge, oh yeah, they had all my birth date, all my information. You had a plane ticket. All you got to do is get on the plane and they'll give you anything you want. Anything you want, accommodations, escorts, ask for it. You need some money for your nonprofits, your neighbor's house, coffee pot, whatever, we got it. We got it, Paul. We'll take care of you. That's
so
how.
What's the answer to this? What is the answer to this whole thing to stop it?
Well, we're doing all we can to stop it. Over 1,000 people were arrested in northern Minnesota trying to slow it down and stop it. And we've asked for an injunction against the opening of Line 3 until it's thoroughly inspected, and all the areas that they were drilling in similar situations where artesian well breach was be examined, and that they make sure that the 33 frac outs are reported aren't the only ones. About half of those have been found by citizens walking or taking pictures or drone shots and everything by citizens that were out there, have discovered these frac outs, which is the hydraulic drilling lubricant showing up when they're digging under the water this way. That hydraulic drilling fluid comes out in spurts, and sometimes right out of the side of the bank of the Mississippi it was coming out and into the river, and everyone was standing there at the Enbridge site not seeing the hydraulic frac out 60 feet further down that one of our drone operators saw. So public citizen participation is very important. Eyeballs on the line from the beginning to the end to see what you see. Most of the leaks that are reported to Enbridge are found by citizens walking in the woods, viewing things, seeing a slick, those kinds of things. So it's important we get citizens out there. It's important that you call your governor. Whitmore in Michigan is on board. She asked that the Mackinac Straight Line be shut down because the lease was being violated, and Enbridge stepped in and says, we don't have to shut it down. There's international treaty law, and over on clause 486 part CB, something was written in 1961 or something, means we don't have to listen to the state of Michigan anymore, even though Michigan issued the easement for the Mackinac Straits. They basically make their own rules and regulations, and a lot of people in northern Minnesota were doing the same thing. I really found it intriguing that Minnesota was arguing that in 1855, when the Chippewas signed a treaty with the United States government, that somehow the Minnesota DNR received immunity from lawsuits filed in tribal court. Of course, we didn't have tribal courts back then, but the more intriguing thing is Minnesota wasn't a state in 1955. So people are simply making up law. Same thing in Hubbard County, where they tried to shut people down. The judge said this: plaintiffs have a strong public policy consideration on their side, as plaintiffs' position is that defendants are interfering with fundamental rights, including but not limited to the right to peaceably assembly, the right to be free of unreasonable seizures, the right to not have property rights taken without just compensation. That's because a sheriff decided he was just going to block people and not let them in and out of an area because they were water protectors and posed a threat to Enbridge. Enbridge called in Homeland Security and they flew a helicopter down from the Canadian border to hover over its plant in north of Park Rapids. And if you ever looked at that, they claim that the water protectors threw sand on their equipment. Go look at the video. We know who put sand on their equipment and caused millions of dollars of damage to the facility through sands and rocks in their system and pipes. It was the Homeland Security helicopter that they sent in. What foreign corporation has that kind of power to call in a Homeland Security helicopter from the border because some people are trying to keep them from building a pipeline? Louise, I guess, or someone. Dee, you're in charge.
Yeah. I just wanted to, I'd read an article recently and it was sort of an editorial talking about climate change and the alarming, incidences of terrorism that are going on at the encampment, at the front lines. And I think that that's a tactic, isn't it? To get us in sort of this frenzied mode that what are we going to do? Climate change is coming and there's nothing we can do about it. That kind of alarming statements about climate change and so on don't work. They just don't work. And one of the questions that one of our board members has posed is, given your, you just have a couple of seconds, but given your experience with politicians and candidates running for office, how could we get them to do the right thing or promise?
You gotta exercise everything you can. And I know it's making phone calls, it's letter writing, it's chatting with people, but sometimes you got to get in people's face. That's all I can say. I think I've really been disappointed in Walt Silver in Minnesota, even though he made all kinds of promises and he's basically, through Peggy Flanagan, under the rug or whatever you want to say, because she was vehemently opposed to Line 3, and she vehemently supports her people's right to clean water and wild rice. So the wild rice crop has pretty much failed in northern Minnesota between the drought and the drawdowns of 500 or 485 billion gallons of water during that drought. They drained several lakes and ecosystems, and I think through this lawsuit and other situations, Indigenous people will be able to sue them, but the damage has been done. So this is why people are putting their bodies on the line. There are people who were getting in front, and it was interesting. It wasn't just from a church group in Minnesota who the police officer walked up and says, sir, if you don't get out of the middle of the road, we're going to have to arrest you. And the man looked up to the police officer and says, I signed up to be arrested if I had to. And my sister over there is going to come out here and stand in the highway to slow these Enbridge trucks down if you arrest me. She also signed up to be arrested because we want to protect the earth for our great-great-grandchildren, just like our ancestors did in the treaties, looking out for forward. So you got to impact all the systems. And I know it's difficult. There's times when I feel like the political system is broke. There's times when I think that Winona LaDuke got to run for governor in Minnesota and be recruited just to say, look at, Indigenous communities are the balance of power. Waltz and Flanagan took the balance of power and won the Native vote and won by 10 or 15,000 votes in Minnesota, same as Biden in Wisconsin, 11,000 votes when the Indigenous community puts out 20, 25,000. I mean, it's a coalition of everyone that brings it together and does the win. Do we have to walk away from the table? Paul DeMain can say, look, let's walk away from the table. We'll have a Republican governor, maybe we'll have a Republican president, and there'll be a lot of damage done. But I don't want to be taken for granted. And I mean that. If I have to run as a third party candidate to say, look, I'm tired of being thrown under the bus and utilized when you want to get elected. But when it comes down to the hard policy decisions, are you supporting the infrastructure bill so the unions have jobs putting in water pipes in Flint, Michigan, where they need clean water? Or do you want to get Or do you want to do this all for a foreign corporation with billions of dollars? Who's it going to be for? US citizens, Minnesota citizens, or a foreign corporation? Period.
Period.
Get
Full
angry,
stop.
be active.
Be our informant, and let me just stay in touch with you on how I can put my whatever talents, skills, and expertise I can put into play as well. I know that it calls for people like you, people like Winona, others who have been at the front lines for how long now, and I know that we are standing with you in spirit and in prayer. I appreciate everything that you do, Paul DeMain. Skabewis.
Well, thank you. Thanks for asking me and all that. And let me know what I'm supposed to do, or if I'm bowing out, you got other business to do or whatever. But, you know, keep in touch, keep your organizations in touch, keep reading the news, keep being active, pray, you know, vote, all those things, and have faith. There is hope, because even if there's just only a couple of us survive the next cleansing, that may be important. You know, maybe we'll get it right the next time around.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I just want to acknowledge, I know there were more questions out there. I just want to thank everyone's participation in this really critical conversation. I'm going to turn it back over to Dee now.
Okay, thank you, Sue. Once again, I want to thank Paul DeMain for his tireless efforts and his dedication to honoring and protecting the earth. He's an important figure in the Great Lakes region on behalf of Indigenous people elsewhere as well. So we're very grateful and appreciative for the time that he spent with us tonight. But now we have on our agenda introductions and reports from our committee chairs with the League of Women Voters of Ashland and Bayfield counties. And there are a number of people who are stepping forward to represent various committees. And I'm just going to go ahead and just read off the list and name the committees, and then I'll ask Bev Lindell to start us off. But we're going to be hearing from Bev regarding civic engagement and the Civic Engagement and Action Committee. Ann Chartier will talk about Voter Services Committee and update us on League of Women Voters Wisconsin policy on DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. Sheila Mitchell will be speaking regarding Natural Resources Committee. Sheila will be speaking on behalf of Joan Elias, if I pronounced that right. And then, of course, Jan Penn with Economic Inequality Committee. So you will be receiving some reports, and I'd ask Beverly if you could start us off.
Okay, thank you, Dee. Again, can you hear me? You can hear. Okay, good. Again, I am the chairperson for the Civic Engagement Committee. I know that's a fairly broad concept, but what it boils down to is working together with others to make a difference in your community, to work together to find common good in terms of resolving issues. The problem, as Paul has been talking about and as we've been discussing this evening, is that we are a politically divisive country right now, and it's very hard to find concepts involving common good. But that's kind of where we are. We're also in a time of serious issues that include what we're talking about tonight, which is the climate change issue, but also real concerns about threat to our democracy through continuing escalation of the economic inequality, but also threats to our voting process through suppressive barriers that allow us to have our voice. And so these are the things that are really consuming us all at this point. We're probably worn out with it, but this is a time where we have to become more engaged. The committees for our current league that you'll hear their chairpersons speaking after me, we have talked and have decided and agreed that for this year of 21 and 22, we're going to work together and try and focus on the primary issues of climate change and threats to our democracy in a coordinated fashion. And so the meeting that you've heard today is kind of our first effort with that. What civic engagement will do specifically is to take a look at how do we communicate amongst ourselves and with the larger community to attack or to counter the misinformation that is prominent in our society right now. And as we've been listening to the news about Facebook and what's gone on with their news faction taking up 30% of the persons who get their news from Facebook, which is a model based on finances and not on accuracy of what they're trying to promote. But anyway, civic engagement will be taking a look at how do we get facts out? How can we do that? We're talking about developing information attached to our website and to our newsletter. We're talking about trying to have a more streamlined action alert process for those who have issues that they would like to become involved in, can take the time to call their legislatures. We're going to try and streamline that for you. One of the things that is already happening, there's a subcommittee with our civic engagement that is concerned about the lack of civic engagement in our high schools. And so they're looking to make sure that that becomes, again, a requirement that our kids learn about what the governance process is like, what our government actions are supposed to be like. So overall, we're going to be focusing this year on how do we work with countering the misinformation, the disinformation? How do we engage people in civil conversations so that they can understand what we're up against with climate change and also our threats to our democracy? And this can be a time where we're feeling overwhelmed, but it also can be a time to become engaged and feel like you're doing something, that you have a purpose in the concerns that are already in our communities. So we hope that you'll call us, connect with us. If you are hearing something tonight that you say you want to be involved with, we'd be excited to have you join us. So I'll turn it back to you, Dee.
You're muted, Dee.
Okay, so I'm going to ask Anne Chartier to take us to voter services, as well as an update on the policy on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Anne.
Good evening, members and friends. It's been wonderful to be able to listen to Paul, and he's no stranger to politics. And it's important to remember that we are a nonpartisan political organization. Our job is to protect and defend democracy. We must also make it work and improve it in any way we can. Diane Cuset and I co-chair our Voter Services Committee, and we are pleased to be working collaboratively with our other committees to deal with climate change and guarantee voting rights. As with the natural world, everything is connected in the political world. Economic inequality is one of the important issues our league is concerned about, and we believe that civic engagement can protect our environment and well-being. Our Voter Services Committee meets via Zoom for about an hour on the third Friday of every month in the morning, and you can read about our activities and how to connect with us in the current issue of the Leaguer, which Sue emailed yesterday. Several members have engaged in fruitful voter registration activities throughout our communities during the past month. As you know, Fair Maps is one of the efforts the League of Women Voters has been involved with at all levels. At this point, the People's Maps Commission has come up with potential maps for Assembly, Senate, and congressional districts. You will receive an email from Sue so you can review them and send comments to the commission. This needs to happen before Thursday night. I have on the DEI issue, I had the honor of being on the board of League of Women Voters of Wisconsin, as Linda Jorgensen and Kathy Allen were before me. and I'm on the State Voter Services Committee and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Our goal regarding DEI is that league activities be developed in an inclusive manner that strives for equity in our communities and represents the diversity of the population we serve. In addition to the DEI resources you can find on our national website, the League of Women Voters of the United States, including informative webinars, our state website will soon have a page with access to valuable materials. We are planning to have a person on the state staff to support our efforts as we become more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. In closing, I invite you to visit our League of Women Voters Wisconsin website and check out the calendar of events. There are several interesting opportunities, including one about the economic benefits of investing in infrastructure this coming Thursday, and issues briefing on October 30. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for that very thorough report and update. I appreciate that. Now I'm going to ask Sheila Mitchell, who is speaking for Joan Elias on natural resources. Sheila.
Good evening. The Natural Resources Committee has mainly been active in the study and advocacy regarding the Enbridge Line 5 issue. Presently, we are awaiting the environmental impact statement on the Line 5 expansion proposal from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. The League's position was clarified early on with our resolution to oppose Line 5 and support the Bad River Tribe's request for removal of this pipeline, which had exposed segments due to being a naturally changing delta. Our resolution included concerns for landowners along the current and proposed expansion of Line 5, with the goal of decommissioning Line 5 entirely. Line 5 presently carries the most carbon-intensive oil mixed with toxic solvents from the largest carbon sink in the world, passing almost entirely through the Great Lakes Basin with no benefit to those it puts at risk. Starting from Superior, Wisconsin, it passes through northern Wisconsin to upper and lower Michigan to end up in Sarnia, Ontario. This line should have been shut down years ago due to its age and its route through such an environmentally sensitive region. In advocating for this position, we have reached out to local landowners regarding their property rights with pipelines, submitted environmental concerns, and encouraged public participation in addressing the Wisconsin DNR, submitted proposed changes to our state's league's natural resources position regarding the elimination of any new fossil fuel infrastructure, as well as working locally regarding specific issues, permits, concerns, and ongoing education relating to this pipeline. We have tried to stay in touch with events unfolding regarding Line 5 in Michigan, where the dangerous tunnel project is proposed for the Straits of Mackinac, and we have followed Line 3 in Minnesota, which Paul DeMain addressed tonight. Both states offer a very sad and sobering reflection of the politics of trying to fight the fossil fuel industry. This topic will continue to take up a lot of our time in the coming year. It covers the triple planetary crises of climate change, pollution, and nature loss, and we are decades late and trillions of dollars short on dealing with these issues. Our committee has collaborated with the Wisconsin League of Women Voters, Wisconsin Green Fire, Wisconsin Sierra Club, Midwest Environmental Advocates, 350 Madison, Honor the Earth, and others, and we remain indebted to their past and continued support. If you would like to help, please contact our representatives and the governor to voice your concerns about the Enbridge Line 5 expansion project and advocate for its decommissioning. If the Russians can protect Lake Baikal from an oil pipeline, surely they can do the same for Lake Superior. Lastly, several on our committee will also continue to work with the city of Ashland regarding its stormwater overflow situation, as well as with UW Extension to tackle some climate and health issues. We have also advised that the city of Ashland consider checking its drinking water for PFAS and other related compounds for safety reasons. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheila. I appreciate that update. And now we're going to turn it over to Jan Pan, who is going to report on economic inequality on behalf of that committee. Jan.
Thank you. Actually, myself and Linda Jorgensen have been co-chairs of the Economic Inequality Committee. Some of my comments, our comments will reflect back on some of the issues that Bev addressed, as well as looking at specifically the work of our action committee. Elder Leopold said that harmony with land is like harmony with a friend. You cannot cherish his right hand and chop off his left. In other words, all things are connected, and that realization disallows us the option to approach the current crises that threaten our global existence with only one eye open and thus in partial blindness. The Economic Inequality Committee is excited and looks forward to the work of connecting the dots between civic engagement, voting rights, a just society, and climate change. The picture revealed by this connection is the next world order. It's the next paradigm. It is the challenge that Paul articulated so well in his presentation. It is the premise of our League of Women Voters consensus, the state consensus on economic equity, which speaks directly to opposition of concentration of power and policies that perpetuate economic and social injustices and inequality. Our past years and our current work on social economic justice, issues like healthcare, childcare, living wages, eco-social justice are deeply rooted in the recognition that civic engagement and a diverse, inclusive participation in the vote, the voice of democracy, are absolutely essential requirements for this transition. The resulting change are policies that will drive what is needed to address the threats to our democracy and the globe's greatest threat, climate change. 4 League of Women Voters teams working together this year. That's what we're proposing. Teamwork is the dream work, and that team includes every League of Women Voter member and our friends. While natural resources works more on the hard sciences, economic inequality works on the broader infrastructure topics that should serve the common good for all, as Paul referenced, for all our relatives. Please join by contacting either Linda Jorgensen or myself, Jan Penn. There is no better time than now to build resilience in our world, for the world of our children and the land to which the people belong. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jan, for those very important and impactful words. I really, in serving as a board member for League of Women Voters, I recognize that each and every member of the League are looking for answers, are looking for a charge to present to us. What do we do now? What can we do to possibly change the course of the rather dire situations having to do with climate change, of environmental injustices, of inequality in our society? There are so many topics that we face as a society, as a community in the northern territory of the state of Wisconsin, and I know the activities of the League are held in high regard by the community members that they benefit. I can say that on behalf of tribal communities in this area who are benefited by the activity and the sponsorship of programs by the League of Women Voters. I know that our work is in earnest and it is honorable work for the communities that we serve, and I'm proud to be a board member. I teach a public speaking seminar, and I presented an opportunity for a professional presentation and a mock interview. And all of my students in that class wanted to do a mock interview for political organizing. So all is not lost. We have a generation of young people, perhaps those who are interested in the League of Women Voters or in a program like Wisconsin Native Vote, in which they can actually have an experience in hands-on democracy. So as Paul said, all is not lost. There still is hope. And maybe we will look to the children of the seventh fire, of the seventh generation, to help us on our way to a more democratic and diverse and equitable society. So I want to thank the board members, the committee chairs who reported, and the board members actually, especially Gail, who helped put this wonderful program together. And I also want to send it out to Sue for being our fearless leader and providing us direction and wisdom and her service as well. I appreciate you, Sue, and I'll turn it over to you. Thank you. Good.
Thank you, Dee. I want to thank everyone tonight. I think this was a wonderful program. It really got me thinking about the additional opportunities where I can serve as we try to protect our earth and to protect the livelihood for all of the beings on this earth. So with that, I want to just say thanks, everyone. Have a great evening, and we look forward to letting you know what's coming up. We still don't know whether or not we're going to have a holiday party or not. I'm inclined to say at this point in time, it's not looking too favorable, but we'll keep members updated on our upcoming events. And again, if you're looking for an opportunity to get involved, and if there's something you like to do, just let us know and we'll say, hey, that committee might be able to help you as much or as little as you can. So thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.
Good night.